Good evening, everybody. I am here. You might not be able to see me. It looks as though we're showing an empty seat, but I can assure you I am here and I'm in the council chamber. So while we resolve that, I'm just going to run us through some housekeeping issues. Can I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording will be archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? And if a participant wishes to speak, can they please raise their hand in person if sat in the chamber, or use the remote raise hand function? If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to speak, please could they turn their camera on to indicate they wish to speak, or place a message in the chat and I will pick that up. When invited to address committee, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and cameras are on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this isn't possible for any reason, please bring this to my attention or to the attention of Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they're addressing the committee, then they should let myself or Democratic Services Officer know. So please can I welcome all committee and non-committee elected members, cabinet members, our officers, and also to anyone watching the live meeting broadcast. And as this is our first meeting in 2024, although we're some way into January, can I wish you all a very happy new year. Moving straight into the agenda and beginning with agenda item 1 and apologies for absence. Do we have any, please? Councillor Ernest?
Yes, Councillor Vince is unable to be with us this evening. Chairman, Councillor Vince Driscoll, if you could record his apologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anything from anyone else? Okay, so moving on to the minutes of the previous meeting from the 12th of December. Are members happy with those minutes? And please, can I... Councillor Iannucci.
Happy to second if Councillor Hooper was what I suspect was a hand.
Yes, thank you. So Councillor Hooper proposing that we move those minutes and Councillor Iannucci seconding. Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? So moving on to agenda item 4, Vale of Glamorgan Tree Strategy 2024 to 2039. This is a reference from Cabinet, and the draft strategy sets out a number of aims and objectives, including a net increase of the tree canopy. And it's before us tonight for members to consider and comment on. Steve Pickering and Adam Sargent have joined us to provide a PowerPoint presentation. So Steve and Adam, thank you very much for joining us this evening, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. So myself and Steve were tasked with preparing a Vale of Glamorgan wide tree strategy, Vale of Glamorgan Council. And is that speaker working? Yeah, good, yeah. So it's a small presentation, basically touch a snapshot of why we feel we need a tree strategy, our guiding principles, our strategic objectives, and our tree management objectives, and then an opportunity to ask questions after that. So, why do we need a tree strategy? This is a pictograph from the iTree survey that we had undertaken in 2021, and the wealth of information within that snapshot proves the need to retain what we have and increase our canopy. Examples within that, which I'll touch on through the presentation. Our urban canopy is 13% canopy cover. Our rural areas 14% cover. Our most common species is ash. Interestingly, 72% of our urban trees are in very good health, which is a lovely point to make. The majority of trees in the urban area are actually in private ownership in gardens, which is another important point. Snapshot information, it removes 1.977 tonnes of carbon each year, and these are the trees within the urban environment, not the countryside areas. Provide annual benefits of £2.05 million per year, which relate to these specific methods of, if we didn't have the trees, we'd have to remove the water or the runoff in different methods. 59 species, so that's a very worthwhile method of seeing why we need a strategy. Also, the obvious things: reduce air pollution, fight climate change, improve the image of our space, build communities, boosting health, and benefiting wildlife. Now, why do we specifically within the Vale need a tree strategy? Wales is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. That's straight from the State of Nature report 2019. The Vale is one of the least wooded counties in Wales. We have 13% urban canopy cover and 14% rural canopy cover. Examples of other iTree surveys through other counties: Newport has 12%, Cardiff has 19%, Bridgend 12%, Wrexham 17%, which is below the recommended figure of 20% cover for towns and cities. The average in Wales is 16.3%, and we fall short of the minimum of 15% target for coastal and urban areas. Also, one of the key reasons that myself and Steve feel a strategy is very important, which is an authority-wide strategy, is we have a consistent approach for managing our trees. So everybody's utilising the right reasons to retain trees. Our guiding principles, which you may have noticed in the draft strategy, are to protect and care for our current tree stock, because one of the main things is a mature tree has a very large canopy, a standard tree will have a very small canopy, and the timeline between mature and immature is many, many, many years. We need to work to retain our existing mature stock wherever possible, in public and private settings. Private would be tree preservation orders, all those methods of us ensuring we retain these trees. Identify suitable locations in the iTree survey. That definitely pinpointed areas of low canopy within urban areas. We should aim for those. Whenever we take down a tree, previously we've always said for every tree we take down, we'll aim to plant 2 trees. There are other recognised methods taking into account the diameter of the trunk, and each tree we take down, we aim to have a sliding scale of numbers from 2 as a minimum up to potentially 7 trees or more per tree taken down. And we need to develop tree planting schemes throughout the Vale. One of the key principles is we will ensure that we plant a minimum of 1,500 trees per year across the authority, so not in Steve's area or Adam's area, within all directorates, with 500 of those being standard trees. I've put an image of a tree because that's what a standard tree looks like. It sounds like a strange term, but that's a standard tree. Minimum 500 of those. Ensure the right tree is planted in the right place. For many decades, trees were planted without thinking of the mature size of that tree. Potentially, you wouldn't really plant a horse chestnut tree in an urban environment nowadays, but it was done 60, 70 years ago, and we're dealing with the consequences. Probably one of our hardest targets: increasing urban street canopy cover within the built adopted highway, so back in the streets. Now, I don't know if you can see that small image, but if we planted a large variety, a tree that will become a large variety tree within the urban environment, you need 30 cubic meters of soil beneath the roadway, beneath the pedestrian pavement, to make that tree make a mature size. So these are very big numbers, 20 meters cubed for 2 planted together. So there's a lot of cost in those trees, not because of the tree, because of the infrastructure. Our aim is to net increase of our canopy cover in urban areas on our land by 5% by 2039. And our strategic objectives are to protect and enhance the current tree stock, ensure the council has an accurate database of tree stock. Now, we've got a very good idea of our tree stock, but not 100% accurate. So we've recently purchased a Confirm asset management system. We're just in the process of, confirm what trees we have. So going around reassessing which trees we have in the system, affirming where we can replant, gathering the data from our trees and parks and countryside, so we have a clear picture of exactly what we possess. Raise awareness for the council's tree stock, and so the importance and the benefits of trees, not the negative attributes that people sometimes attach to trees. Ensure that all tree related decisions are based around the same decision making processes, and guarantee for no other reason than lack of understanding. There may have been historically trees modified, removed within other directorates just because they haven't got the clarity of a strategy and the reasons behind what we do and don't do. Develop community involvement in tree related issues. Now, myself and Steve work with many groups already: Penarth Tree Forum, Barry Action for Nature, Replant Roost, Replant Lantwit, Plant Dinis, many other areas. We need to embrace those further because the benefits they bring are unbelievable. Penarth Tree Forum have tree wardens that assist us watering our trees that we've planted. We work so closely. Steve's team work with many community groups, and we need to continue to expand that. It can assist with grant aid funding, but also it can help us manage our trees more effectively. Increase tree planting and natural regeneration, because that's one of the simpler ways of getting canopy back, by letting areas do their own thing next to woodlands. And this is important, prioritise increase. Our average canopy covers 13%, but we need to focus our energies on the urban areas that were under 10%. Now, within the iTree survey, it picked the 6 main town areas. So, for instance, Cowbridge has a 20% canopy cover. Barry has 8.9. Roos is our lowest with 5.5%. You can visualise that yourself if you've driven through Roos, not many trees. Penarth is our highest, 21.2%. Dinis 20.3%, and Lantwit / St Athan is 7.7%. So energies are going to be put in place, bringing up those lower levels. Prioritise tree planting in urban areas with the highest levels of deprivation. Establish a healthy and diverse tree population, maintaining tree numbers. Diverse because if you get too many singular species, if a disease comes in, you can quite dramatically lose your thing. If we had ash as our only species in the Vale, within 5 years we'd have no trees in the Vale, because ash dieback is here, it's throughout Britain. 98% of ash trees will succumb to it and die within 5 years. I think that's the figure that's out there, and that's our highest species within our areas as well. Take into account current and future changes, so pick trees that work well with the climate changes. Once more, I mentioned ensure the right tree, right place. Now, that's not in the Vale of Glamorgan. It's a reality. That is a football pitch in an English urban community council, and the one arm of the authority thought, let's get some trees back in the land. They didn't connect up with the sports element. They came along, planted trees across the football pitch. It was a well-used football pitch. The team turned up to play on the football pitch, and they had to move the trees. So that's an unusual example of right tree, right place. Deal with queries relating to trees from stakeholders in a consistent and effective manner. Protect the council from any third-party risks. I mean, any insurance claims are dealt thoroughly through a specific route anyway, but there can sometimes be quicker ways to get to the end result if both parties follow the joint mitigation protocol, which is in the draft strategy, which if both parties' aim is to solve the problem but retain the tree, you can get there quicker. But we can't force third parties to follow that protocol. And ensure all of our operational staff are trained in quantitative tree risk assessment, which is a method of managing the physical risk of a tree. Yeah? And it's a very worthwhile tool to probably reduce works that we may think needed to be done in the past based on this protocol of analysing the situation. Now, these are tree management objectives. Now, these two slides are probably pretty obvious to me and Steve, maybe not obvious to lots of people watching, and have always been the case within certain elements of the authority and within most authorities managing trees. But these are things that we don't do work on trees for. So we don't prune or fell council-owned trees if somebody simply thinks it's too big or too tall. We have many queries about that. We don't prune or fell trees because there's leaves falling from the tree that may go on private land. We don't modify trees for that. Same with bird drop-ins. We would not work on a tree or take out a tree because it's having birds doing drop-ins. Same with fruit and berries. We wouldn't do any work on a tree for that. One of the classics at the right time, the wrong time of year for some people, but the right time of year, naturally, the honeydew or sticky dew that comes from trees. We would not cut back or reduce or remove a tree because the sticky honeydew is on your windows or on your car, or there is a pretty straightforward way of cleaning that, but we would not work on a tree because of that. We would also not do it for reducing pollen. 4 more. The council TV reception is a classic. We do not do work on a tree to improve somebody's sky reception or TV reception. We also wouldn't work on removing roots of a tree that somebody thinks might go into their damaged drain, because a root would never damage a drain. A root is not strong enough to grow through a drain. It would only find its way into a crack. So we would not do work on a root because it's made its way into a damaged drain. One of the favourites is we would not remove trees because of light, because no one's entitled to light into their property, or views. You can have a view with a tree in it. Some views are more interesting with a tree in it. We don't remove trees because somebody would like their view back when they purchased that house 20 years ago. So they're the key ones of the 29 objectives. And then final slide, which are our next steps, is we will shortly commence a 12-week online consultation. Over that period, officers will be available to meet with appropriate groups. I'm meeting the Penarth Tree Forum in March to do a very similar discussion, so they can gather their questions to add to the consultation. After the 12 weeks, we will analyse as a group what the potential modifications may be or may not be, and then I think we report it back to Cabinet as changes. And that's the last thing, and we're happy to have any questions if we haven't covered any. And I'll turn off my thing now.
Thank you very much. Really interesting and helpful, clear presentation. If I may just start with a question myself. So very much welcome the commitment to plant at least 2 trees for every tree lost, and to increase the tree canopy. And that's clearly critical in terms of things like carbon capture. And we've got a report before us this evening where that's particularly relevant. So I was concerned to note on page 68 in the iTree report highlights the issue that you've also just highlighted, which is the percentage of rural trees. 39.5% estimated as being of poor or critical condition, dead or dying, rising to 41.6% on agricultural land. So clearly you've describe for us the engagement you already have with community groups, which is going to be critical in terms of our ambitions and addressing the issues. Clearly also critical to engage with landowners. Just wondering what that picture looks like at the moment and what steps are being taken to engage with landowners.
Okay, so at the moment we've got the local nature partnership, which probably most councils are aware of, who do a great deal with local communities, local landowners, to get things like hedgerows and connectivity sorted out across the wider Vale. We've also got a new project, which is Restore the Thaw, which is the river catchment project, and that is extensively linking in with private landowners and farmers. And in the last month and a half, we've planted 6,000 trees. And with another 4,000 trees to go in the next month, hopefully, if the weather permits. And over the next 3 years, that will extend to basically the project will cover 40,000 trees being planted. So quite considerable. And like I say, that's working exclusively with private landowners and farmers. And it's been a really good response. We thought it might be a bit difficult because obviously anyone who's got an agricultural farm is a business. But it seems to be every time the team go out to work on a particular piece of land or farm, the farmer next door says, oh, can you come and have a look at my land? And then there's another hedgerow link planted or a corner of a field planted. So that's really good. And we're working well with local communities across the board through the town parks, country parks, loads of engagement. And yeah, everything's really positive, to be perfectly honest.
Thank you. That's really encouraging. Really good to hear. Can I bring in Councillor Iannucci next, please?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. So the first one was, so you mentioned that in the report it says that English oak was better at soaking in water. I was wondering if you have a breakdown of what each tree sort of does best in a similar sense, and whether that works alongside the table that mentions replacing sort of 2 small trees for 1 big tree type thing, like whether they sort of all work together. And then my second question was, you mentioned, obviously this is all to do with trees on land that we own. Are we doing anything to encourage people with lots of land to plant their own trees? A sort of a discussion with the landowners as well?
Thank you, Councillor. Are you able to respond to that?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Again, the larger the tree, obviously, the more sort of soaking up it'll do, because the bigger the root system, the more water it'll retain. So that's how that works. And each species is kind of slightly different, but planting a tree anywhere in a floodplain or an area that floods is beneficial. So that's kind of how we'll be going forward on that, and sort of look at areas that are of issues. Yeah. So that's the first part of the question. And again, yeah, with the Restore the Thaw project, local nature partnership, we do try and encourage landowners to do their own planting. And the other thing we're hoping is Welsh Government are currently bringing out new agricultural sort of payment schemes, and hopefully that will encourage landowners to plant more trees, and we can be part of that sort of advice process as well. Okay.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Iannucci? I saw a thumbs up, so yeah, that's good.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Prothero, I think you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I had a very similar question to you about the problems with the percentage of trees in the rural Vale that are in a critical state. And it's quite ironic, really, that a couple of weeks ago, one of the farmers actually approached me with hundreds of dying from ash dieback trees, looking for some sort of support from the Vale. So I'm wondering what sort of process we could have in place for that sort of engagement. And the second question, I know that we are looking at the right tree, right place, and different species will do different things. But I'm wondering also, as this is a long-term plan, are we considering the changes in weather patterns and climate change on where we are putting trees as well? Thank you.
It's in our catchment areas for our current grant schemes. It's probably good if the farmer could contact in some way direct, and we can see where we can help. There's things like Woodland Trust are currently giving out trees to different areas if there's issues with ash dieback. So there might be some way in there as well for the farmer. And again, I think the agricultural payment scheme hopefully will help out as well. So we just keep our fingers crossed on that one. Your second question, forgive me, was...
It was to do with right tree, right place.
Oh yeah, right tree, right place, yeah. If you look in the iTree report, basically The future is obviously going to be very difficult due to the climate change that we're going through at the moment. We wouldn't look to plant any sort of non-native species in our natural environment, such as woodlands and hedgerows. But in town areas in particular, we would look at different species that would be more heat resistant, offer better solutions for flooding and things like that. So that is, you know, a major priority going forward right across the UK.
That's great, thank you. I'll put the farmer in touch with you then, if I may, Steve. The trees he's talking about are actually all along the Landau Road, so it's exposed. They're quite mature ash trees, and I mean, with high winds, they could cause danger, I guess. But so I'll do that if that's okay with you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hooper, did you have a question or comment?
Thanks both, and thanks for the presentation. I think this is a report that's to be welcomed. I think it's really important that we've got a tree strategy. And one of the things I just want to reference, it seems that this is the strategy represents a journey, not a destination. You're coming back and referencing back later, which I think is really, really important. A couple of things which I wouldn't mind picking out and just delving into in a little bit more detail. We talked about you've recognised there's a link between deprivation and canopy cover. We talked about the difference between Barry and Penarth, Barry and Cowbridge. I'd also be interested in how wards in Barry differ as well. So I'd be interested in if you've got any information on that. I think that's really important. The second question relates to this when we're cutting down highway trees. And at the moment, the answer is we're cutting them down. We may be replanting them in Porthcurry Park or wherever it might be. But what we're not doing, we're just concreting them over. Should we, I appreciate this is a tree strategy, but should we be thinking about more urban drainage systems that replace the trees? And should that be part of the way, instead of going for 7 trees, we'd be quite effective by having, you know, urban drainage systems, which is what we need to do in all new builds now. It feels like something that we should be putting to. I'd be interested in your views on that. 2 more points. The next one, and you may not be able to answer this, but I couldn't see any reference to, is there any timber strategy in the Vale references? So do we have a timber industry? We've got some forestry commission, I was going to call it, land. How is that linked into it? And we're making sure, is there a link to that? Appreciate in this context it's private land, but welcome your view on that. And the last one's a more general point, and this is the worrying thing about this, is that this whole strategy seems predicated. There's almost this caveat at the end that said it's like subject to budget pressures. And I think this is such an important point. And, you know, there's a real lesson to be learned, and we need to get people engaged in a tree strategy. It needs to be at a priority level within this council that doesn't just fall down when, you know, when budget starts to get tight. I'd like to see trees being something that are really recognised. So I'd welcome your thoughts on that as well. Thank you.
So if I can invite you to respond to those questions. In terms of the last point that you made, Councillor Hooper, about budget priorities, I can see that responsible cabinet member Mark Wilson has requested to speak. So if you want to comment on that issue, you're welcome to, but feel free to leave that to Councillor Wilson, because I'm sure he'll be happy to respond to that. But if you could respond to the first few issues that Councillor Hooper raised. Thank you.
Okay, so the first one about the I-tree survey doesn't go down to ward level. I don't think it does in any authorities, does it? The I-tree survey. So it's something that we haven't got the data on. It's a bit of a tricky one, but it is important that we relate to the below 10% of canopy cover plus the low deprivation areas. But we haven't got any detail about the specifics of the canopy cover in those areas. Okay, it's a bit of a tricky one. Highway trees cut down, and then, like I was saying, plant 2 or 3 or 7 in some park or somewhere else. But also, like I understand what you're saying, we also need that urban drainage systems within the space as well. I mean, I would love to get trees back into the urban environment also. It's just the tricky bit about a drainage system. the budget question is question 4, but the difficulty of planting a tree back in the urban environment is they can be between £5,000 and £12,000 per tree to get them back into that urban environment with the correct growing medium beneath it. Timber strategy. Our timber that we produce is part of our contract with our third-party contractors, and they have their own timber mills. So within the Vale, I'm not aware of any other connections with the Forestry Commission. And question 4 was the budget question.
Yeah, thank you. I know that Marcus is online as well, but if we take perhaps the question, if committee are happy, we deal with the issue about budget priorities. Councillor Wilson, are you happy to address that? I know you've had your hand raised for some time. Thank you for your patience, and feel free to comment on any other issues that we've raised so far this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think it's been a really good debate so far, and I think, I think a lot of the members have bring up some really salient points. And you're right, we are facing, a real serious issue out there in terms of climate change. And one of the issues we've got is obviously real concern that we have, and we have allocated money, as you can see, for our dieback, which is a considerable serious issue, as you know, not just for the Vale, but the whole of the United Kingdom, in fact, the world. And clearly, one of the issues that we do have to deal with, I'm afraid, is trees, like everything else, gets diseases, and they do need replacing. But sometimes, as you rightly said, and I think it was Adam, very much the emphasis is right tree, right place. And in some cases, the Victorian era, if you think about Penarth in particular, a lot of the trees were planted well over 100 years ago. Sometimes they weren't the appropriate tree for the environment that we're in, which what causes some of the issues we are facing in the urban areas. Because as you know, a lot of these big trees are very mature now. They do cause problems in terms of the highways, the pavements, as we all no doubt know. And I know that Councillor Ernest is also on the call, is well aware of that, because in Plymouth Ford in particular, that's quite a common problem, notably in places like Plymouth Road, and also in my patch of Victoria Square as well. I mean, but there are also really some good groups here, like the Penarth Tree Forum, that are working really well on this and are engaging really well with us as well, in terms of having that healthy debate about the future. And I'm really delighted to introduce this tree strategy and introduce this draft strategy, because it's the first one, I think, in over 20 years. And I've been asking for it as a member for a considerable period of time, and I'm really delighted to present it. But there are issues, and going to budgets, yes, let's be honest, the council is facing a real crisis in terms of finance, like a lot of Welsh councils now and UK councils. And clearly, as Councillor Hooper rightly says, we can't ignore it. We've got to see it as a priority. And yes, there are competing priorities, but clearly this is one of them for the future, because trees do so much good for the environment. We're talking about an excess of carbon in the atmosphere. One way of capturing that carbon is to actually make sure and encourage and plant more trees. And the more trees we plant, the more carbon we can absorb from the atmosphere and suck in. As you know, trees give out oxygen, and that's something that we obviously all need, don't we? So clearly, we're working on this, but I also would emphasise we've got to work with stakeholders, and our main stakeholders are not just landowners, but also the residents as well. It's really good if people have got a garden, they can plant a tree, and it's not as difficult as people sound. Often you can go to a garden centre and pick a quite a reasonably priced tree, and you'd be surprised, without too long, it's got quite a healthy, large specimen. Obviously, you can get advice from officers about where you want to plant the tree, if you're worried about it, and obviously read about it as well, and to look into what kind of tree. But I think if everyone could plant trees, we'd drastically increase our canopy, and that would be really good for the health and the healthy environment of the Vale Glamorgan. But my last point is, can I also thank officers here. I know they've done a superb job, and I'm really, really grateful for them. I'm also grateful for the consultants that we've used on this, because, you know, they made a really good effort and they really add value to this draft strategy. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hooper, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just briefly, and just to make the point that the ward by ward data is really, really important. So we need to find a way of making sure we get that. So it's I would suggest that's a takeaway from this meeting, because deprivation and canopy cover are clearly linked. They're linked across the world, and we are no different from others. And the point that I said off mic earlier is that, and I think it's an important one, relates to the budget discussion. SUDs are considerably cheaper than replacing a tree. They can have a similar level of carbon capture, and they can also take water out of the urban environment. So I think that I would encourage the officers and the cabinet member to go away and think about SUDs in relation to this particular strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please do.
Sorry. We're currently going through a green infrastructure process at the moment to get a strategy there, and I'm pretty sure a large part of the green infrastructure will incorporate SUDs in urban areas, because that's obviously vital for carbon capture anyway. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'd also, in advance, asked whether or not there was additional information on a ward-by-ward basis. So I think that's something that we can pick up at the end of this agenda item, Councillor Hooper. Forgive me, Councillor Innes, I can see that you're on screen, but Councillor Champion actually had raised his hand before you. So if you'd like to take yourself off screen, then I'll invite Councillor Champion to raise his question or make his point. Thank you.
Hello. I think it looks like a clapping hand rather than raised hand. It's a bit confusing. In Cowbridge, Westgate, there are trees that are pollarded each year, and then there's a tree that's just been removed. I'd like to know what's happening. Is there a replacement tree going in there that's you say that you've been talking to community councils. Have you been liaising with Cowbridge Town Council? They've just had a report done, I think, by ESA, possibly, about their trees. I think that was my points. Yeah.
I don't know whether you've got that level of detail in front of you. If you haven't, it's absolutely fine to update Councillor subsequently. I'm sure that would be fine with you, Councillor Champion, but are you able to respond to that specific issue?
The Westgate trees towards the end, they're pollarded on a cyclical basis of I think every 5 to 7 years. It's a method that some people think it looks a very harsh method, like Windsor Road in Barry, Poets Corner area in Penarth. Once you start that method, which was 40, 50, 60 years ago, it's not a method you can remove. Yeah, okay. Now there can be lapse pollards within the authority that we can manage as 30-year lapse pollards, which were pollarded once, then let grow. There's a way we can manage that by keeping the weight intact with that tree. But the harsh pollards, or other people call it lopping, because it's quite hard. It is a method of maintaining those trees. Now, I don't know the specific other tree that you mentioned, sorry, that's been removed, but I can go in and find out.
It's one of those trees that obviously was a disease.
Okay.
So is it going to be 12,000 to replace that tree, or there's a stump there at the moment?
I can find out. I don't think there's a recognised definitive replacement of that location, but we will have it on our records for potential replacements. But that could easily be the £5,000 to £7,000 thing to replace that tree in a logical tree pit, which straight away starts constricting what we can do. I'm unaware of a Cowbridge Town Council report. I know ESA, because ESA is one of our call-off contractor, so he may well have been asked to advise on a report you've had done. We haven't been systematically going around speaking to community councils. We've been discussing with community groups. So Penarth Tree Forum, I don't think you either, Steve, have been speaking to community councils, no? But we're happy to, if they would like us to go along to expand further on the detail of the draft strategy.
So I do have one more question. You talked about 1,500 trees. Are you relying for private planting to meet that 1,500? And you say 500 standards, and so will the rest of them be whips?
So we're saying within the authority, so not relying on private planting, we will, as an authority-wide, directorate-wide, 1,500 trees, with a definitive 500 being standards, meaning that the other 1,000 could well be whips, which is obviously a much cheaper way of getting numbers up. But our aim would be to not rely on third-party planting, authority-wide, and as long as all directorates of the authority follow the regulations of what we're putting in place, then I don't think that 1,500 will be difficult, and it will be the baseline. Obviously, we will now start collating numbers of trees removed over the coming period to go, well, that's the girth of that is this, so that needs 7 replaced, that needs 5, that needs 2, and that will be a running figure that could easily go past 1,500, and we will surpass that 1,500. But the minimum will be, if we cut down no trees this year, which is an impossibility, by the way, we would still plant 1,500 trees.
Thank you very much. So just for the sake of clarity, in terms of the approach we're taking, for every tree lost, at least 1 or 2 trees will be planted, but not necessarily replacing a tree that's been lost in exactly the same location, because that may not always be possible or indeed needed, depending on priorities elsewhere. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Ernest, thank you very much for your patience. Would you like to come in and ask your question or make your comment? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Yeah, because actually the sound quality this evening is very, very poor. The sound is being broken up every few seconds with breaks in it. Last night for the special council, it was perfect, but tonight it's not at all good, at least not as far as I'm concerned. If I can just move on, I've got a couple of points that Councillor Driscoll asked me to raise. I think they're comments rather than questions. He makes a point about the cost of trees. He suggests 40 to 60 pence per year. I would imagine he's talking about whips. And he says it doesn't sound much, but it certainly adds up. And maybe you're able to give a rough figure for that, the cost of that. And he also says, what happens when we get ash dieback, etc.? It probably costs the council in excess of £500,000 and rising. And the last is a point from myself. We've lots of sites, as Adam and will know, in Penarth Town Centre where trees have died. The pits are still there, but they're simply a square with a couple of flagstones or tarmac around the pits. Have you actually done a survey to show where trees were, 15, 20 years ago, so that you're able to replace them in the spots that traditionally did hold a good and strong tree? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I know that Marcus is joining us this evening, and also Colin Smith. Do either of you want to pick up any of those points, particularly relating to cost, if you're able to? Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me. The points I was going to pick up on really was Steve referred to, which is around green infrastructure, and it related back to Councillor Hooper's comments around SUDS as well. And just to advise that we will be bringing a green infrastructure strategy to both Cabinet and the Scrutiny Committee. That will happen in the next couple of months. That strategy will link in with the tree strategy, which Adam and Steve have brought tonight. And a key part of the green infrastructure strategy will be sustainable urban drainage, how that links in with existing tree and proposed tree planting and other forms of planting. And it will also, I believe, identify deficiencies by ward basis. So while it may not focus specifically on trees, it will identify those areas within the council's wards where there are a deficiency of green infrastructure. So I just wanted to flag that point up. So Councillor Hooper is aware that the work that he's referring to is well underway and will be picked up in due course. And indeed, part of that work's being funded by Project Zero and the Project Zero Reserve. So I just wanted to pick that up. I think in respect of Councillor Ernest's points, it's fair to say, obviously, that smaller trees and whips are much cheaper to purchase and plant in many respects than larger, heavy standards. I think what Adam and Steve have both alluded to is that where we can, we will plant the biggest tree possible that's suitable for the location. But obviously, in some locations, particularly, for example, in roadside planting in areas where you're within green infrastructure areas, for example, or sustainable drainage schemes, whips sometimes are more suitable because as part of their growing mechanism actually binds some of the drainage areas together. And then finally, I think there was a reference made to the cost of removal of ash dieback. Obviously, the council itself has considerable issues with this, and Adam has referred to the fact that there is a reserve which has been set up that has been topped up also by Project Zero to deal with ash dieback on council property. We've also had some innovative schemes where we've brought people in to remove trees. They've taken the wood themselves, and therefore we haven't had to pay them to remove the trees. But I think it's fair to say that the largest proportion of ash dieback trees are on private land, and that will be the responsibility of the landowner mainly to remove those trees, and we will be seeking to encourage them to replant in due course, obviously with a combination of actual verbal encouragement, but also hopefully with some support from Welsh Government, particularly on farmland when it comes to replacement schemes for nature conservation. So I hope that's answered most of those questions.
Thank you very much, Marcus. That's really helpful. Councillor Ernest, did you want to come back on that, or does that answer the questions that you raised? I'm sorry, we can hear you.
Yeah, I put them all on now. It's the easy way. Yes, I think so. Thank you, Marcus. It does answer the question. I'll take the response back to Councillor Driscoll as well. And I'm glad to hear that we've got the green strategy coming forward in the next few weeks, which will at least answer some of the questions that have been put. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Colin, did you want to add anything to any of the points that have already been raised? We do have a couple more councillors who want to engage in the debate, but if there's anything you want to add at this stage, please do feel free to come in. We'll move on. I'll take a few more questions from councillors, and then Colin, if there is anything you want to add, please feel free to do that, but equally don't feel that you're under any pressure to do that. Councillor Stephen William, please, did you want to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yes, well, firstly, you know, I think we're all coming from the point of view that there is a climate emergency, and therefore, you know, the planting of trees is essential, which is why I'd just like to say thank you. You know, I'm so grateful for this work. And Marcus has partially answered my question regarding the green infrastructure strategy. I'm keen for lots of aspects of it to be realised. One of it is something I'd like to sort of raise as a little flag, which is the idea of relieving drainage issues where trees may not necessarily be the answer to everything. Mark Hooper alluded to that earlier, as have several other councillors. Some comments. Firstly, I think the big problem we have here, and we'll see it in lots of departments, is the budgetary constraints. I think they're severely hampering the work. I mean, I arranged a site visit with Neil Williams about 1.5 years ago. We visited about 6 different sites throughout just the ward that I represent. And the big thing for me was the tree management issue as opposed to the planting of trees. As I said, 6 different sites. Where it was pretty obvious the trees needed to be cut down, but they couldn't be. And the reason for that was because they had to wait for them to deteriorate further before we could justify cutting them down in terms of cost. So that's one flag I want to raise. The other issue is the planting of trees in areas where maybe it's not something I would agree with. For example, in the wide open spaces in Porthkerry Park, for me, it's anathema. We should be focusing on where the ash dieback has occurred and not, claustrophobically closing down wide open spaces, which is why, there was some sort of consultation done when it was being done a few years ago, but it wasn't really, people were basically allowed to do whatever they liked, no matter how much I piped up. And then the other issue then is about tree management, about removal, crown lifting of trees that are causing dangerous obstructions. Now, we saw in the presentation a lot of reasons why you couldn't do anything about trees, but what about when they're, pushing up the pavements, causing obstructions? You can't get wheelchairs or prams past, for example, Romley Park. There's a real issue there, and I was just wondering what officers thought of that, because the trees there are enormous. They're now meeting each other over the middle of the road. That's my penultimate point. My final point you'd be glad to know is knowing that we've got 1,500 trees a year, which is fantastic news. There are areas in the ward I represent where I'd like to request trees to be planted in certain areas where residents have actually asked for them. I'd just like to know who I contact, because up until now I've had to pay for them out of my own pocket, and I'm not as rich as Croesus, so I would very much like to know who I contact. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So lots of issues. I think one, which is how is it determined where trees will be planted in terms of how we're expanding the tree canopy? How is that decision made? Will there be consultation with residents or with engaged groups about that? Then there was also a question about tree management, and obviously much of the activity that's been happening over a considerable period of time has been happening in the absence of a tree strategy. So this tree strategy is very welcome, but clearly there has still been a process for dealing with problem trees. So how do residents report trees which they perceive to be problematic?
If a resident feels a tree is problematic, it would be through the call centre, through our Granicus system, which would then come through to Neil Williams, is one of our tree officers. We now have a senior ARB manager as well, Philip John, recently employed. So we double-sized ARB team, which is great, I must admit. And then they would assess based on all the things I said we don't do work for, but if anything falls into the concern over the risk, they do the risk, the size. We wouldn't do work on a tree because it felt too big, but we would do work on a tree if we felt there was a risk because of the size of the tree, if there were disease within the tree, if there were failings within the structure. So this is why we have an arboricultural team to assess the safety of that tree. Now, with concerns over pathways, pavements, trees maybe lifting pavements, causing trip hazards. That's why I'd connect up with the highways team, Nathan Thomas, and see how we can rectify that by maybe realigning the pathway, turning. There's a few in Penarth where it's been a very high lift of the root structure onto the pavement, but they've caused a hump over it, which is actually safe enough, but safe enough to go across there with a wheelchair or a pushchair to help us retain that tree. I think that was that question. There's a number of questions, I think.
There was a comment about trees that were, I think, dangerous, not being treated because they had to deteriorate further. Is that the approach?
I mean, I don't know the specifics. I mean, it could well be that these trees had ash dieback. Okay, now with ash dieback, there's 4 stages: 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the recognised method of managing ash is, if it's just at stage 1 or 2, you do not remove them because they may not move to stage 3 or 4. Most ash trees will, but you keep a watching brief. As soon as they move into stage 3 or 4, that's when you manage the removal safely. Yeah. Okay. Sometimes we might remove a stage 1 or 2 because it could be very landlocked. And when they're the method how ash dieback takes hold of a tree is different to many other diseases. So it can break easier, it can fail in different locations. So the best method of removing stage 3 or 4 is you have to use an elevated platform, because you can't clear, fell or remove areas because of the failing systems within the wood. So that's the only time, if it's landlocked and it would be not possible to get an elevated platform to it and we couldn't let it free fall, that we might remove a 1 or 2. But the current status is 1 or 2 stay, watching brief. If it moved to 3 or 4, then we remove.
Thank you. That's very clear. Councillor William, did you want to come back in on that? Does that answer your question?
It pretty much answers my questions, because I think, not that I want to take up too much time in the committee, I think a lot of my issues I can just send a direct email to Adam, generally a lot of it's been answered. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor. And finally, I think Councillor Drake. Thank you for your patience, Councillor Drake.
No problem. My first query, which may have been covered and I may have missed it, is we all know about ash dieback and Dutch elm disease. Are we aware of any more serious diseases that may be coming on board or lurking in the distance that we are aware of that could attack our trees, certain trees such as larch, oak, silver birch, especially due to the climate changes we are experiencing?
Yeah, there's more on the horizon. There's a disease that's attacking chestnut trees at the moment. On the south coast of England, some oak trees are showing some disease effects. So it's kind of, as the climate is changing, diseases are rising, and we've just got a horizon watch all the time, you know. So as we said earlier about planting different species now, particularly in urban areas, that would be resistant to pests and diseases. And there's quite a nice bit in the iTree document about sort of pest and diseases coming in. And Adam's team, my teams, you know, the guys are fully aware of anything new, and they do watch, you know, to see if anything new is rising in the area. If it does, we tend to have to ring and contact Welsh Government, because most of these diseases are now notifiable and need to be recorded, and then you have to enact as quick as possible to stop the spread. So that's where we are at the moment. So it's an ongoing situation.
Yeah, it's a very worrying one as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, so, yeah. The other thing is, can trees be planted in areas which are prone to flooding as a contribution to flood management? Is that possible?
Yeah, you can get willow species, alder, that are all sort of compatible with living in sort of wet conditions. So yeah, there are species out there.
At, is it?
Yeah, indeed.
Oh, thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Colin, I can see you're also waiting to come in. Did you want to comment on anything we've discussed so far?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to help that response to Councillor Ernest, we shouldn't really do worth noting that on Thursday, Cabinet are going to consider the draft capital programme for 2024, 25, 28, 29, and within that is a proposal to allocate £875,000 to help deliver the tree strategy, and that broken down to 500,000 towards tree planting, £100,000 a year for 5 years, and £375,000 for maintenance, allocated at £75,000 for every year. So £175,000 both tree planting and maintenance for a period of 5 years.
Thank you, Colin. You're breaking up a little bit, and it sounded like that would be really useful information for committee to have. So could I possibly ask you to email that information to us, and we can then include that in the minutes so councillors have that information before them? Thank you. Councillor Perry, did you want to come in?
Yeah, and thank you for Pamela at the very end, stealing one of my questions. Yeah, thank you, Adam, for your presentation earlier. It was really, really thorough and good, and I'm sure I'll invite you. I can do it now to some of my community councils, and it would be interesting to know if we can actually implement reshaping services and have the Vale Council working more with town and community councils, particularly in keeping the new trees that we are planting alive. Because if we go around the Vale, it's not just the housing developers who plant trees and then let them die. We've got some dead trees at Cosps and Lakes and at schools of the Vale of Glamorgan Council. So as well as planting them, we need to keep these trees, these young trees alive, particularly in the first 3 years while they get established. So I'm wondering if there are plans that we can possibly implement immediately to keep these trees alive. Also interested to know that potentially trees can be planted, 7 new trees to replace 1 tree that's taken down, because obviously I've lost quite a few mature trees in my ward, which are much loved, very prominent, and we get 2 little 2-metre high trees, which, you know, there's no canopy there. So that's been disappointing here. And now we're hearing we might in future get 7. So I'm hoping this gets implemented pretty quickly. And again, flooding from farmland in the rural areas, we have lots of, or just recently I had quite a bit of flooding on the highway, and tree coverage and more hedgerows, and hedgerows are excellent for biodiversity, more so than trees. That would help with alleviating some of the flood concerns that we have in my ward and beyond my ward in the rural Vale. And so, yeah, we'd be very keen to have some more of that and work, as you said at the beginning, with the landowners and farmers to get more planted.
Thank you, Councillor. Adam or Steve, do you want to comment on any of those issues?
The watering issue. I mean, obviously, I have one specific area, which is the parks, gardens, and I recognise the difficulty of keeping the trees watered for the first 3 years at least, yeah, based on the conditions. I mean, in our summer months, it absorbs 3. We have the Penarth tree wardens watering trees as well as what we do. We have 3 full-time staff with bowsers on the back of 3 vehicles, probably 5 days a week, covering the Vale, doing all the trees that we've planted. I know that Steve has got a lot of watering taking place in Cosworthton, so I totally recognise in fact, we were discussing in a meeting today the need to probably look at purchasing another bowser ready for, because obviously the more trees we plant, there's the 3-year cascade. After 3 years, you can maybe breathe a bit easily and leave those trees to their own devices. But with us planting at least 500 standards, if not more, we need to ensure that we recognise the ability to keep them watered, because there's nothing worse than having failing trees on wherever they are. Yeah. So I totally get that comment, and we're pushing as hard as we can with assistance from user groups, replant roofs, go around watering the plants that we've planted, the trees we've had planted there. So any assistance from the community working together can help with that watering element.
Thank you very much. So I think we've had a really good debate on this. Councillor Hooper, do you want one final brief question or comment?
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me. I should have asked this question before. This is a ward-specific question. We've got a development in the waterfront which is many hundreds of trees short on what they should have been putting in before. How does the tree strategy deal with developers who have a commitment to deliver trees and then don't?
I can say Marcus would probably be better positioned. Yeah, Marcus.
Yes, thank you, Marcus.
The tree strategy is very much aimed at the council's own land and the land which it manages. The issue of tree planting and not complying with planning permission or complying with planning permission and indeed planting schemes, that's covered by the planning legislation. That is being dealt with, as Councillor Hooper knows, through various means on that particular application. But in all cases, with all applications, where there are breaches or where landscaping schemes either fail or are not delivered fully in accordance with the scheme itself, then there are powers under the Planning Act to deal with that. If a landscaping scheme fails within 5 years, the council is entitled to go back and ask the scheme to be replanted. So those issues are covered by planning conditions attached to planning permissions.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Councillor. So just to try and sum up, I think we've had a really good debate on these issues, which I think shows the level of interest in the tree strategy. In terms of comments to feed back on the strategy, I think committee would agree with me that we would very much welcome the tree strategy. There were some comments about consideration being given to engagement with community councils. Also important to recognise that you have limited capacity within the team, but I think that's something that committee would suggest would be helpful. Where possible, it would be useful to have more information about the situation with individual wards, but we recognise this is a very comprehensive survey and that might take some time. But I think over the coming months and years, it would be helpful to understand the situation within wards. And if I may add a comment of my own, I think the information within the strategy about how you're managing trees and the approach you're taking to trees was really, really useful and clear. And I think in terms of the level of inquiries that we get from members of the public who may not be familiar with when the council will not take action and when we will take action, I think it would be helpful in terms of publicising the strategy to ensure that there's very much a focus on that, because I think that would be very helpful for residents. And I would also suggest, if committee agree, that the tree strategy forms part of the forward work programme for this committee. And when officers advise it's appropriate that we have an update on progress, that perhaps that would be in 12 months or so. But I think it would be something that committee is clearly very interested in wanting to engage with, and it would be very useful to have that feedback. Councillor Ernest, are you coming in to support those proposals?
Yes, I'm coming in to move that we adopt the report, offer our thanks to the officers and proceed as you've just outlined, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ernest. And can I have a seconder to that? Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Hooper. So thank you. Please pass on the committee's thanks. Receive your thanks ourselves, and please pass on the committee's thanks to your teams for the work that they're doing and for the work that they've done to bring such a comprehensive, helpful strategy to us this evening. You're very welcome to stay for the rest of the committee, but you're equally welcome to leave and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you. So we move on then, committee, to agenda item 5, the Project Zero update report. And I think I've already mentioned that this report ties in nicely with our previous agenda item on the tree strategy. It's to advise committee of the progress with Project Zero from April to September 2023. And just to remind committee that the council declared a climate emergency in 2019 and a nature emergency in 2021. Project Zero is part of the Council's corporate plan and the Council's ambition to reduce its own carbon emissions to net zero before the target set by Welsh Government, which is 2030. And I believe Susanna McWilliam is joining us to take us through this report. Hello, Susanna. Welcome. Could you take us through the main points of the report, please? Thank you.
I will do, thank you. So thank you, Chair, for the introduction. And as you said, this report's focusing specifically on activities between April and September 2023. So Project Zero programme draws together the work that's happened right across the Council, and it reflects the commitments in our Climate Change Challenge Plan, plus some other relevant work that we wanted to highlight here. We're going to be presenting the report to yourselves tonight and also to CPR committee tomorrow night and then on to Cabinet, and it's something that we do every 6 months. So just to remind the committee that my role as programme manager is to really support the Project Zero board, and this report very much reflects the work of a lot of other people and teams across the Council. And because of the breadth of work, we know that this report won't capture absolutely everything, and it aims to strike a balance between providing an overview, but some of the finer details too. And Marcus and myself will do our best at the end to answer any questions, and there may be some areas that we'll need to go back to colleagues on. So I'm going to run through the order of the cover report and highlight a few of our highlights and talk a little bit about some of the sections in more detail. We have made the recommendation that we note the progress detailed in this report, and specifically in Appendix A, which has a lot more detail in it. We have introduced RAG rating for the first time. So that's the red, amber and green rating of progress that you'll see in the appendix. We will introduce our carbon emissions reporting for the year 22-23 that's in this. And I'll look and talk you through a little bit about the funding that's been available in reserves in the project that have been awarded that funding to date. Chair, you've already mentioned the background to this report and to Project Zero. In section 2, we've revisited some of the comments that were made back in June, and we hope that we've put in a response to this. So I won't talk through it, but the response to the last comments were in there. Some of our progress and highlights then are in the next section, but I'm going to highlight some things that will be in the appendix as well. So we've been doing quite a lot of engagement work through Project Zero. In July, we held a climate workshop for the 50+ forum. So that's an age group that are incredibly committed to climate and wanting to know what they can do and what they can take forward. We planned a youth climate conversation event, and that was co-designed with the Vale Youth Forum. So we spent some time in this 6 months doing that. That was delivered in October, so we can give you more of the updates then in our next report. The Vale Food Partnership back in the summer ran their Food Vale Trail and shone a spotlight on quite a number of businesses. There was very good wide community engagement in that. There's also been a lot of communication and engagement around green spaces. We've talked earlier on about the Restore the Thaw project and a lot of volunteering that's happening there. There's been work in our community gardens across our country parks with volunteers and use of the Section 106 monies to work in green space. We've been ramping up how we update our web pages to shine a spotlight on some of the related work. So we have new council housing and energy web pages. They've been updated to reflect new home energy efficiency measures. And there's a new grassland management web page, lots of other things, but those are a couple of highlights. The report draws attention. We've heard quite a bit earlier on about the role of the replacement local development plan, the development of the green infrastructure strategy, and of course, the tree strategy that's been presented earlier on. Another highlight might be the solar PV feasibility site visits that have happened across 6 buildings. So that's gearing up to do more work in that area. You can see in the appendix as well where we have RAG rated it. Green would be where things are on track for the 6-month period. And then we move into orange and occasionally red. So some of the orange might be slower than expected progress. An example of this might be one of the commitments, Project Zero 3.2. That's a training that we were developing for staff and for members. We had a bit of a delay on that in the 6 months. We lost some technical expertise in the organisational development and learning team. And we also took some time to try and learn from another local authority on what they were developing. So it took some technical time to be able to see that. But I'm really delighted to say there's been a lot of progress in that area since this report, beyond this reporting period that we will share in our next report. So we did have a barrier for this 6 month period, but we have managed to overcome that. In the carbon reporting section, we've been reporting our carbon emissions since 2019-2020 period. So there's a lot of work that's gone in, particularly by the energy team, to collate this information from right across the council. We submitted our report to the Welsh Government in September time, and we follow a set methodology that's used by all local authorities and all public sector bodies. We were pleased to see a drop of 25% in our carbon emissions over that period, but we do have some caveats about that. There are small changes in methodology that will be reflected, but also carbon emissions.
Susanna, I think we have just lost your connection. I don't know if you can hear it. Yes, you're back. You're back.
Okay, perfect. Sorry for that. So I was just talking about our carbon emissions that we reported to Welsh Government in September. And I was mentioning that work, we have a few caveats, although we're delighted to see a drop in of 25% on our overall carbon emissions. We know that there are some tweaks to methodology, but we also know that our carbon emissions don't reflect some of the great work that's happening. So in our buildings, for example, in our schools building programme, we know that that work that's being done is going to really help reduce emissions in the future. But our procurement emissions and our building emissions are simply related back to the number of pounds that we spend. So we'll always see emissions showing up even when we're working in a way that's fundamentally about lowering our emissions. So we must be mindful of that. Just as a reminder, when we report our carbon emissions, it's in a number of different areas. It's the emissions related to our buildings, our fleet and other assets. So that would include street lighting, for example. It covers our business travel. It covers our staff commuting. It's for all of us, including in our schools, and home working. It covers our waste. That's our organisational waste and municipal. It covers land use. It covers supply chain, and also it covers our renewables. One of the things we really wanted to report back to yourselves is that we have increasing confidence in the data that we're collecting. Every year we're fine-tuning the way that we collect that data, and we've got stronger confidence in that than we've ever had before. We've also, thanks to the hard work of Lorna and her team, been able to highlight some of our gaps. So there'll be quite a bit of work in the next few months to tighten up and plug those gaps when we're doing our report for the next year. The next section looks at our resources. We have a Project Zero fund, but as well as that, we've drawn attention to the different types of reserves that can be used for the decarbonisation work across the council. The Project Zero board oversees the particular funding for Project Zero reserves, and in this reporting period, we've implemented that process. So we have a process in place where we welcome different projects being put forward to the board, and we'll review bids of £5,000 and upwards. The whole board will review those, and anything under £5,000 is reviewed in a different way. So we've drawn attention to some of the projects that have received funding in this reporting period. So, for example, we've had the Pendoilen Primary School, their biomass boiler has been recommissioned thanks to funding from Project Zero reserves. We've had a buildings decarbonisation feasibility study that's been undertaken in this period, and that's looking at the viability of future buildings that will be constructed when the LDP, the replacement LDP is passed. We've had some smaller projects that have been quite exciting too. The school's vegetable growing project. And we've had quite simple things like corporate membership of the UK GBC. That's a body that was sort of sitting in silos, and now everyone from across the council, thanks to this funding, can access their resources. Just moving down through the report, it does mention an unallocated figure remaining in there. There is work being done at the moment. It should be made in the public domain very soon around the allocation of that funding. Apart from that, we have how the proposals evidence the 5 ways of working and contribute to our wellbeing objectives. And then we move down into the detail of the appendix, which I won't go into now, but I'll open the floor to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susanna. That was really helpful running us through that. You referenced unallocated funding, just so I'm sure that we're on the same page and talking about the same thing. I think page 11 talks about 367,000 that was unallocated at the point at which the report was written for decarbonisation schemes. Is that the figure that you're referring to?
Yes, it is. That's right. So yeah, so the team has been looking at that, and they put forward proposals for how that funding will be used, and that will be that's still at the process of being agreed, but it should be very shortly.
Thank you for that clarification. Committee, are there any questions or comments for Susanna? Councillor Hooper, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Susanna, for that update, which I appreciate. I've just got 3 general points to make, if I may. And a lot of this, when you were talking through, you're verbally talking through the report, you referenced shining a spotlight quite a lot. And I think I can probably, we've just had a tree strategy where we talked about actual actions that will change things for the future. And I think what I'd be looking to see as this report progresses is less about shining the spotlight and more about tangible actions. So I'll be interested in your perspective on that. I also, if you run through the risk and barriers section on the RAG report, resource is the most mentioned word, or lack of resource, or resource unavailable. And we're again talking about budgets. I appreciate the cabinet members still on the call, I would have thought, so maybe they want to reference that. It's about priority for this. For me, this is a huge priority, and therefore needs to have the budget it requires. And lastly, and I also sit on the governance and order report, and there was a discussion at the last but one governance and audit committee where the committee considered whether or not Project Zero should be recognised as a catastrophic issue because of the amount of work that we're needed to do to get us to a place where we're actually dealing with this thing effectively. And I'm not marrying these two together from this report, and I'd just be interested in a perspective on that. Last thing, and it's not a question, I visited the MFIS, which is referenced in the report, reuse site over the Christmas period, and I just want to say what a great place it is, fantastic service, and a real addition to the bill. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I ask you to respond to that, Susanna, I can see that Councillor Wilson, the Cabinet member, has indicated he'd like to speak. Would you like to respond to any of those points, Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. Just a few points. First of all, I think, Project Zero is absolutely a key element of the council, and it's a key element of our corporate plan. And, although we do have problems with resources, as we all know, clearly we cannot ignore this. This is such a vital area as we go forward. But I'd also like everyone's attention that this coming week on Thursday, I'm going to present a waste report. Now, in that waste report, there is various initiatives that Welsh Government legislation is introducing, which will actually, add more value to what Project Zero is undertaking. A good example is the forthcoming producer responsibility, which will mean that producers will have to be more financially responsible for the amount of packaging that is used. Because clearly one of the issues that we all have is that there's so many products out there with excessive packaging, and really someone needs to pay for it. And clearly that is one of the areas where perhaps we could actually reduce the burden on the council taxpayer, but at the same time will mean that producers will need to think a bit more strategically as to how they package their materials if they need to at all. I mean, and no doubt you go to a supermarket or a shop and you see things like vegetables have got their own packaging called their skin. Why do they need any more? And that's a question mark that we should all be thinking about. And when we go to a shop, we should be, saying, why are these packaged? Surely they shouldn't be. So these are sort of areas where we could all do as residents, as councillors, to say, actually, no, this is unacceptable. But you're right, finance is an issue. Of course it is. And it's not going to go away. But I would like to emphasise the importance that we're all responsible here for this, and we all need to recycle more, and we also need to think about what we put in our black bags, because clearly that is a major issue. So, we all here as ambassadors effectively for the council, irrespective of which political party, irrespective whether we're part of the administration or not, that we all have a social responsibility, I would argue, to make sure that we actually, reduce the impact upon ourselves, upon the negative impact that we have on the planet, that actually we reduce the amount of carbon emitted, and actually, hopefully, that we do the opposite and we think about actively how we all can act in that, and therefore reduce the amount of money that, in my area, for instance, we spend on collecting waste, which doesn't need to really be collected. If people took home some of their waste, or even thought about perhaps what products they buy from the shops and how they consume and use it. I think that's something that we all need to seriously think about. And I think Project Zero, through those very actions, really highlight that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I have to say my reading of Appendix A is that there is actually quite a lot of detail in there about specific projects. Susanna's, I think you've touched on some of them. We're talking about the Restore the Thaw project, work that's being done with volunteer days around the Great Glamorgan Way, etc., work that's being done with schools. But is there anything you want to add to what Councillor Wilson has already said, Susanna?
I think that the balance around tangible actions, and to respond to that comment, I think there will be a variety of different types of activities that are within Appendix A. Some of them will be very tangible action focused, with more detail in that and kind of numbers and outputs, that type of thing, and some won't be. So I think that's sometimes the nature of what Project Zero is, and the nature of the kind of commitments that are in our climate change challenge plan. There'll be a variety, but certainly take that on board to in future reports around the kind of balance of what feels tangible. The question on the amount of work needed to actually get to net zero, in the report I mentioned the carbon management plan that's in development. So when we come to the next report, we can reflect on the carbon management plan, and certainly the plans are to strengthen what it is that we need to do to get to net zero by 2030. So that will help to support that. And just thanks for raising awareness of that reuse site as well. That's great that you've had a positive visit to that.
Thank you, Susanna. I'm just wondering, we can pick this up at the end of the debate, but might be helpful perhaps to have a more detailed case study the next time we get a report coming to committee, so that we're able to see in more detail some of the tangible work that's being done. Councillor Champion, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Restore the Thaw, 25,000 per year for the next 3 years, is that to do with just presenting to people? Is it planting trees? Do we know where those £25,000 are going each year? And also, when Pendoyland's got a new biomass boiler, and Cowbridge and Penarth, I think, leisure centres have new gas boilers. Is there a better way forward to get to Project Zero heat pumps?
I can see that, Marcus, you've asked if you can speak. Did you want to address those issues that Councillor Champion has just raised, or issues that were previously raised? Or shall I go back to Susanna?
Yeah. Yes, Chair.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Marcus.
with the I was going to. Sorry, if I could, Chair, I was just going to come in on a couple of the issues that Councillor Champion raised around Restore the Thaw, and I can probably help on the issues around boilers as well, if that's okay.
Thank you. That would be really
Susanna,
helpful.
Is that okay if I come in on those? Yeah. So with Restore the Thaw, the money that's been allocated from Project Zero, that is match funding to match the funding that was secured from, I can't give you the exact figure. I don't know if Susanna, you do have the exact figure, but it is substantial funding. It's over £1 million worth of funding, I think, that was secured. And we are matching that funding with £25,000. That £25,000 will be used in conjunction with the main tranche of funding. And as part of that, there will be obviously some work which will be undertaken to carry out consultation and liaison with groups and communities and landowners. But the lion's share of it is actually around delivering the project itself and the planting that goes with that, and the restoration and the restoration of the ecology and the habitats that goes with that. So the 25,000 for year on year from Project Zero is the match funding that was needed to secure the main grant. In respect of the boilers, just to advise that the boiler in Pendoyland School was a boiler that actually existed before. It had been commissioned as a biomass boiler some years ago, but had fallen into disrepair due to issues around feedstocks and other issues around it, and actually lack of somebody being found to actually maintain it, because obviously biomass boilers themselves are deemed to be considerably greener than gas boilers and obviously oil and other forms of heating. What we've done through Project Zero is to, if you like, recommission that boiler and ensure that it will be maintained and used going forward. So that's why Project Zero stepped in basically to find the funding to do that. In respect of other heat sources, so Councillor Champion referred to other properties. I don't know specifically about those, but I do know that going forward, the council itself will be looking to secure the most suitable source of heating for its own buildings, and having regard to the building itself and what works. And that will obviously have a very key focus on the most sustainable form of heating at that time. As Councillor Champion is probably aware, there are still some issues with air source heat pumps and ground source pumps as well, particularly when it comes to larger buildings, although those issues are slowly being resolved. But in quite a lot of cases where you are looking at a larger building, which quite often the council owns, as of yet, some of the solutions are not quite perfect. So it will always come down to a combination of what's the right boiler at the right time. Obviously, in some cases, we do have to work on a stopgap solution, which will take us through for a few years until we can replace it with a more long-term solution. So hopefully that's provided some background to those.
Thank you, Marcus. Really helpful information, Councillor Champion. I hope that addresses the issues that you've raised.
Thank you.
Great, good. Councillor Prothero, you wanted to come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation tonight. There are lots and lots of activities going on to contribute to Project Net Zero. So the assurance that I seek is really to see if there's a way that we can monitor this in terms of what contribution all of these steps are actually making. And I say this because we've got 6 years to go until 2030. I look forward to seeing the carbon management plan. I know that's coming out soon, but I'd like to get a feeling from the work that we're doing, how much of a contribution to reducing carbon will it make? Will we know? Have we got a sixth of the way there? If we do all 80 challenges and we complete every activity, every step, does that mean that we will achieve carbon net zero? Difficult questions, I know, to ask you, but I think that's the kind of assurance I'd like. Over these 6 years, the things that we say we're going to do, how they will contribute to the reduction of carbon, so that we can have a better feeling of, yes, we are getting there, if that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Susanna, are you able to respond to that point? Thank you.
Yeah, happy to respond to that. Yeah, we know, we'll be quite honest, we know that we've got more work to do to connect the dots. We know that Project Zero is not solely, I just want to kind of make it clear, it's not solely about reducing carbon, but reducing carbon is a really big part of it. Through our reporting to Welsh Government, we know very clearly what areas we need to work on. So we need to reduce our energy use in our buildings and our schools. We need to reduce our water use. We need to reduce our waste. We know we have to do all of that work. We know, for example, on our commuting and how we travel, how are we going to decarbonise that? How are we going to get people off their driving in, walking in, cycling, using active travel? We know we've got a lot more to do there. Procurement, we know the lion's share of our carbon emissions is linked to procurement. We can't stop purchasing things, we can't stop delivering services. So be quite honest and say, I can't imagine that any other local authorities is having a different, would have a different response. We know it's going to be incredibly difficult. But we know that we have to try, and we are aware of the measures that we need to take to get there, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy, and we do know there are going to be some barriers in the way. There will be some financial barriers, for example, decarbonising our estate. We know there'll be some behaviour change barriers. How do we convince everyone that works for the Vale of Glamorgan Council to decarbonise how they travel? For example, how do we cut waste right across, both internally and externally? We kind of know what we need to do, but actually getting there is not always straightforward. So I hope that answers your question. The carbon management plan, I think, as a document in and of itself, might just give us another tool then to track that in a different way that might be welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Councillor Perry, did you have a question or comment?
Yep. Here I am. Yeah, just a few comments. There may be a question somewhere in there. Yeah, there was interesting comments in the report. For example, poor communications between Cardiff Capital Region and the council. So that's something that's been raised by members before, and something that needs to be addressed. At Wenvo, there is a new sort of street gym at the sports ground, and it's a fantastic facility. Probably one of the best in Wales, definitely better than anything Cardiff's got, I reckon. So well done to those involved with that. But perhaps we should be rolling it out more ambitiously to other communities, particularly those in rural areas where we have no gym and no sports facilities. So rather than, for example, people in St Nicholas driving to Barry to a gym and finding other residents of St Nicholas at the same gym, having all made the 25-minute car journey, we could actually have a sort of outdoor facility within the village, and that includes all other villages, whether that's Penthline or St Hilary. But that's something we should be looking to find land and prioritising that land, because there's no point having lots and lots of housing if we were all living very, very unhealthy lifestyles and the climate's changed irrevocably. So I think that should be given really high priority. We need to reduce car ownership as well as use. And I'm just wondering if it's more of a planning matter rather than, or equally a planning matter as much as it is a visible services matter and active travel, because active travel will get people out of cars. But also, if you're not building houses that have got bicycle parking in front of them, and you're not building houses in the correct location with bike storage, etc., you're going to struggle to get modal shift. And in terms of my own community, we have a development at Sycamore Cross with a bus stop in one direction, so you can get to Cardiff, but you can't get home. So that should have been picked up in planning at the time, but it wasn't. And we still have, we've now got budget problems, so there's no money there to put a bus stop in there. And we have residents trying to catch the bus. So it is an emergency and we need to get tangible results. But I think there's a couple more things if I just go through here. Again,
Councillor Perry, I just want to make sure we don't stray too far away from the remit of this committee. And I recognise that Project Zero is a very much a cross-cutting strategy that impacts all areas of the council's activity. I just think it's to be helpful and mindful of any issues that might sit better in other committees. But you know, do continue if you think there's something that officers can respond to. Thank you.
Obviously it's in the report before us, and so perhaps we need to have more emphasis. And these are tangible results in delivering share sheds, shared laundries, reducing waste, because we need to better utilise the products we have. We need to have more community buildings to house these, and that again goes back to planning. We need to actually preserve the community buildings we've got and build more so that we can have the share sheds and the facilities that we need. So that's in the heart of Project Zero, and things again like car clubs, so we can reduce car ownership more drastically. So we are reducing the amount of waste, but are we reducing that quick enough? What is our target? At what point do we get to zero waste where nothing goes through the incinerator, which is where we eventually need to be sustainable? So yeah, it's going there, but we do need to have a little bit more urgency and a few more tangible targets, as the people have said before me.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. So I see, Marcus, do you want to respond to those points? Thank you. And then I don't see any more hands, so I think we'll draw this debate to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be really brief. Obviously, Councillor Perry has raised some interesting points there. The majority of the issues he's raised actually are, if you like, directly relevant to both the current local development plan and the replacement local development plan. And that plan is inexorably linked to the Project Zero itself. And obviously, as part of, if you like, private development, we will be ensuring to the best of our ability that the issues that he's raised will be dealt with. That being said, as he is aware, we do not have the final say on a lot of these things. And for example, where developers are able to show that they cannot viably put certain things in to a development, we are left with very little option but to accept that. But ignoring that fact, it is something that is really relevant to us, and we will try our best to secure the proper planning of the area. I do think it's worth just raising a couple of issues here, which perhaps need to bring just a touch of realism into where we are. One of the issues we have around this is resources, but not just financial resources. It is also the resources, the people resources who actually deliver some of this stuff. We also have to work within a legislative framework which is constantly changing. And so if I just draw attention to two things which are sort of slightly relevant to what's going on, actually securing energy experts and experts who have expertise in the area of decarbonisation, particularly when it comes to energy, is incredibly difficult for the council. Salaries that some of these people demand are extremely high, and quite often they don't want to work for a council. So Project Zero has, for example, looked at funding a business and community decarbonisation post, and currently we are working hard to find somebody to fill that post, but we are not getting the candidates we would like applying. And I think that one of the things that's behind that is, as I say, they're in such high demand. There are not very many people who have done it, and if they are there, they've tended to be working in the private practice. So we may have to look at alternative ways of accessing that expertise, such as consultants, etc. One other thing just to point out is that, and some eagle-eyed councillors may have noticed this, Councillor Champion may have noticed it, but in England, one of the pieces of work we've commissioned through Project Zero is to look at building decarbonisation and the policies we could put in the replacement local development plan, which would go further than the current Welsh Government guidance and the building control guidance on decarbonising buildings, and would also look at embedded carbon in building conversions and building replacements, so that we could make judgment calls on what is the most carbon effective way of building when it comes to people wishing to knock down existing buildings and replace them, and that type of thing. Unfortunately, or fortunately, in England, a few councils have gone as far as this, Bath being one of them, and Councillor Champion very kindly in previous meetings and previous discussions we have has pointed us towards some really good examples of this. But unfortunately, in England currently, we understand there may be legislation brought forward to stop councils going beyond building control, current building control guidance. Now, if something like that were to happen in Wales, that could have a really serious impact on how far we can go in terms of pushing developers to achieve carbon neutrality. So I just wanted to highlight, obviously we've done some really good work and Susanna's pointed to some really good work, but there are some risks and barriers which are perhaps could, I'm not going to say they are, but could cause us issues in the future in trying to reach these goals. And I think it's really important because obviously councils do need to understand that it's not just the council who has to achieve this. We can encourage and we can control and we can work with developers and private individuals and others. But sometimes there are others who have other agendas and which can ultimately lead to that those goals that we're trying to achieve not being achieved. So I just wanted to flag that up. But thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Marcus. Really important to remind us of the fact that the council is not on its own in terms of needing to achieve its ambitions. We are dependent upon others as well. Susanna, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just a last comment or offer to the committee. We are aware that the Project Zero report has a lot of breadth in it and a lot of detail from across the whole of the organisation. So if the committee would welcome any other officer joining next time we present to be able to talk in more depth about any particular area, please do let me know and we can arrange that.
Thank you for that offer, Susanna. I'm sure the committee will be interested in taking you up on that the next time the report is before us. So there are 6 recommendations before us tonight. 4 recommendations are for us to note. First one, that we note progress in the report and in relation to the challenges within the Climate Change Challenge Plan. Secondly, that we note the RAG rating progress April to September 23. Thirdly, that we note the Council's 2022-23 carbon emissions. And fourthly, that we note the funding available in reserves and project funding. So just to take those first 4 recommendations on block, are members happy to note? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Can I have a seconder for that, please?
I'll second that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Drake. And then there are 2 recommendations for committee's approval. The first is that we refer the report and any comments to Cabinet to be considered alongside comments from Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny. The comment that I've noted, I think that's come up in a number of comments in the debate this evening, is that we would welcome more information about how individual projects and activity make a tangible difference in terms of the targets that the Council is seeking to achieve. So with committee's approval, I would suggest that we pass that comment back to Cabinet for their consideration. Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Happy to support that recommendation. Do I have a seconder for that, please?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Drake. And the final recommendation in relation to Project Zero is that the committee recommends to Cabinet that the report be distributed to all elected members, members of the Public Service Board and all town and community councils. And is committee happy to propose that? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And can I have a seconder for that recommendation?
I'll second that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Drake. Thank you. So moving on to the final agenda item for this evening, agenda item 6, recommendation tracking an updated forward work programme. I'm going to take this report just to very quickly run through the recommendations that are contained in appendices A and B. So members can see that Cabinet noted the committee's previous recommendations for the highway maintenance criteria matrix to reflect properly the needs of cyclists. And Cabinet also noted the committee's recommendations for the LDP consultation period to be extended from 8 to 10 weeks. There are just then 2 recommendations which are listed as ongoing, and these relate to the medium-term financial plan. The first recommendation outlined the committee's support to the commitment for services to those most vulnerable to be maintained. And the second recommendation was for the council to emphasise to the public its financial challenges. Just to update committee that both of those comments went to Cabinet on the 11th of January, and I can advise the committee that Cabinet noted both of those recommendations from committee. So on that basis, I'd like to ask the committee for the status of those 2 recommendations to be changed to completed, and for the committee to accept the status of the other recommendations as shown in Appendix A and Appendix B. Is committee happy to accept those recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And can I have a seconder for that, please?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Drake. Then moving on to the forward work programme, hopefully all committee members are aware that an extra committee meeting has been scheduled for the 13th of February at an earlier start time of 4 o'clock. This extra meeting has been called so that committee can consider budget proposals for 24-25 and will provide sufficient opportunity for the Finance Department to properly assess any proposals that we make as a committee before Cabinet considers the budget on the 29th of February. That extra meeting also frees up more time for us to consider an update on the waste strategy, which is going to Cabinet this Thursday, before coming to our original planned meeting for February, which is scheduled for the 20th. So I hope that's clear with all committee members. And then also on the 20th of February, we'll have an additional report outlining the findings of an Audit Wales review of governance arrangements for the Planning Department. That report is going to Planning Committee on the 25th of January, so members will be able to have sight of that report before it comes to us. Our March meeting will be focused on service plans and performance target setting for 24-25, and we're also likely to receive budget monitoring update reports at that point. We are expecting a report on the city deal at some point, but just to let committee members know that a date is yet to be confirmed for that, but that is something that I will ensure I take up, so we get a date on that as soon as practically possible. I can, though, confirm that we will have a report on bus services coming to us for our April meeting, which should tie into some developments, and hopefully we can have a full and useful discussion on bus services, which I know members are very keen to explore. So on that basis, can I suggest that the work programme be updated following this meeting to indicate that a report on buses will be with us in April, and once updated for the work programme to be uploaded to the council's website. Are there any queries? Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Chair. Just on residential parking permits, I'm just wondering when we're likely to expect a report on that, or will it be covered in the budget changes?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Councillor Hooper, we don't actually know the answer to that question, but we'll clarify it with officers and we'll make sure that we're clear on where that issue will be addressed and at what point in the forward work programme. Anything from anyone else in relation to the forward work programme? In that case, the recommendation before us is that the updated forward work programme attached as Appendix C is approved and uploaded to the Council's website. Is committee happy to support that recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And can I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Drake. I can see you, so that's really helpful. So there are no further matters before committee tonight. That concludes our business for the evening. There are no urgent issues. So just to remind everyone that we have those 2 meetings scheduled for February, the first on the 13th at 4 o'clock and the second on the 20th at 6 o'clock. Thank you all for your attendance and your engagement this evening, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Good night.